Okay, so let's talk spanakopita. This is a really popular dish which is essentially a Greek spinach and feta pie. I know a few of you have been asking for the recipe and for me to show you how I make this because I have been sharing it on Instagram quite a bit. We have it every week. My kids really love this dish to have as either lunch or dinner, but there are a few ways of making spanakopita. So there's no one straightforward rule. The other way that I'm not showing you today is what I would call more of an entree style, where I would make my own filo pastry for this version because it turns out a lot better. But essentially it is like a long log of filo pastry which is then filled with the spinach and feta filling, and then you create like a snake-like shape to then fill with a pie dish or even a cake pan to then bake and then slice up to serve. So I wouldn't essentially serve that version as a main dish. And I'm not showing you that today. What I'm showing you today is what we would have as a main dish, served with just a simple Greek salad for a weeknight dinner. It is really straightforward and easy to do, so I hope that you're then able to create this at home because I think you'll really enjoy it. So a few points just to note before we get started is that, as I mentioned, I don't make my filo pastry for this version. I do buy the store-bought filo pastry, and I myself use the Antonio brand. I don't use the Borgs brand, so look for the Antonio in your store. It's usually in the fresh fridge section. So there's that. And what I'm using today is frozen spinach. So I have thawed out about 250 grams of frozen spinach for this recipe. You can use frozen kale if you can't find any spinach, especially at the stores right now. During this period of isolation, it can be a bit difficult to find the ingredients that you would typically use. So frozen spinach, kale, you can use fresh spinach if you wish. You can use silver beet chopped up, which I've done before, and that turns out really nice as well. So feel free to use any green that you wish. But the main star of the show, I guess, are all of the other ingredients. So parsley and a few spices that really bring out the flavor in this dish. And of course the cheeses. So I'll take you through what I have done so far. Is I have thawed out my 250 grams of frozen spinach. Make sure that you really drain out any excess liquid from the spinach. There will be a lot of water that comes out given that it is frozen, and it's really important to drain that out so that it doesn't wet your filo pastry. It can become quite soggy even when you bake it, so get it as dry as possible. And what I've also done is included about 250 grams of feta and about 100 grams of ricotta cheese, which just softens the quite intense flavor of feta, which can be quite salty as well. I personally prefer the feta that you buy in brine. I use the Dodoni brand. Look for these smaller containers which have the feta sitting in brine because it keeps it a lot nicer than the packets you see in the fridge section, which is essentially using the suction packaging, and that feta is quite dry and it just is a little bit different, and I personally don't prefer working with that. So look for the one in brine. Any ricotta cheese is fine. If you can get fresh, perfect. Smooth, light, doesn't matter. Use whatever you can find. I personally prefer adding a leek to my spanakopita. This is my personal taste preference. You don't have to add leek, it's not essential, but I really enjoy it. So I am going to just use half a leek here. Most of it will be the white section of the leek, which I'm just going to thinly slice. You don't need to pre-cook this. You can just add it to the filling mix, and during the baking time, it will cook and soften and become quite mild in flavor. So it's not as intense as what you would expect leek to be. It does give a nice different layer of flavor in the dish. So just chop up a little bit more of this. So a little bit of green section can go in as well. might leave it there for the quantity that I'm using today. And what I'm also going to chop up while I'm here is a bunch of parsley. So I like to use fresh parsley. If you can't get to the shops and get a hold of any parsley at the moment, then you can buy dry, but I think that it adds a lot more, well, it adds a lot of greenery to the dish as well, so I really do prefer using fresh parsley if I can. The other herb that I typically use fresh is dill, so I would use maybe half a bunch of dill. It does give a really strong fat flavor, but it adds a nice saltiness to the pie as well. This time around, I couldn't find dill. We've been avoiding the shops given the coronavirus that is going around at the moment. So I am going to be adding dried dill leaf tips. Again, I prefer using dill because it adds a lot of nice greenery to the dish, but in saying that, the flavor is more important. So I'm going to add maybe about 2 teaspoons of dill. The kids don't mind it either, so I really like it. So there's the dill. I'll add in our leek and our parsley. And it's not traditionally used, but I like to add a bit of mixed spice to my spanakopita. It gives a little bit of a sweetness to it, and I don't add too much, so you can't really notice all that much, but I really like it. So I'm going to add about a half teaspoon of the mixed spice to a teaspoon, depending on your taste. And then, of course, we need to add some eggs, and this will help to raise our pie as well. So really important for the filling. If you're making the other type of spanakopita, the snake kinds, I would probably use maybe 1 or 2 eggs. I wouldn't go that far with it because you don't really want that dish to raise all that much. But because we are using, making a traditional pie, I'm going to be using 5 eggs. So here's hoping that no shells go into the mixture. I use the whole eggs. If you are keeping an eye on your cholesterol or any other health reasons, you can use a few yolks and then a couple of egg whites in addition to that. But here we have the whole eggs, and they're really full of protein as well. So 1 more. And then all we're going to do is mix this up. So just break up the eggs and then give it a good stir. Try and even out all of the spinach that you have. It will be a little bit dry, so give that a good mix. It already smells really nice. It's a really healthy dish. There's a lot of greens in here. The eggs are really healthy too, so if you're looking for a way to get your kids to eat a lot more greens, this is a really good dish. They love the pastry as well, and it makes it a little bit more novel when it's a pie, I guess. But the filo pastry itself is probably one of the healthier pastry kinds that you can find, instead of using puff pastry or any others. And it's really thin and quite versatile. It has a relatively neutral flavor, so you can make a lot of savory dishes, a lot of sweet dishes as well with filo pastry. So whenever I have any leftover after making spanakopita, I like to make apple strudels or simple berry turnovers for the kids as well. Okay, so that's all mixed in. I forgot to add just a little bit of pepper. You don't really need to add that much salt because the feta is quite salty itself. So I don't add any garlic or anything like that. There's a lot of flavor already packed in here, so you don't need to add anything else. Okay, so now all we're going to do is then assemble the pie. This is really, really simple. I'm going to get my pie dish here. Yay big. I'm actually not too sure about the diameter, but it's a standard pie dish. You can use any other dish as well. You can use rectangle if you like, whatever you have on hand, anything that can go in the oven, but check that it can go in the oven first. I have my pastry sheets here. Just move this to the side. And what I'm going to use is olive oil. So typically you could use butter, melted butter. I'm not going to. I just find that olive oil is a little bit healthier, but more importantly, it's quite easy to work with as well. So instead of using a brush and brushing around all the butter and wasting all of that time, I just sprinkle on olive oil as we go. So what I am going to do is layer up all of my filo pastry sheets, half in the pie dish, and then half sitting outside of the pie dish. And I'll show you why I do that a little bit later on. After every second sheet, you can do this with every sheet of filo pastry, but after every second dish, I prefer just sprinkling a bit of olive oil, and that helps to make the pastry nice and crispy. So I'm going to add 6 layers of filo pastry to this pie. When you go to different restaurants or you buy the store-bought spanakopita, I do find that they're quite buttery and quite oily because there is a lot of butter or oil added to every single layer of the filo pastry, which I don't really enjoy. I like the filling being the star of the show. So I prefer just keeping it to every second layer, but you have your own taste preferences, so once you get used to it, you can layer as much as you like. So the last sheet, you can add more sheets as well. 6 is what I found works best for this particular pie size. So tweak it as you need. You could do 8 to 10 layers, which would turn out quite nice. But see what works with you and what you've got at home. And now all we need to do is then scoop in all of our pie fillings. So I'll go ahead and spread that out over the pastry. And just make sure that that's as even as possible. Okay. And then all that we need to do is layering the filo sheets half in, half out. Makes it really easy to finish off. So all I'm going to do is fold back all of these layers. And again, we are going to be adding oil to every layer or every second layer of the pie, of the filo pastry sheet, sorry. So again, olive oil is way easier to work with than using a brush and dipping that into a cup of melted butter. And it's just a really speedy, tasty dish. So the last couple of layers here. And just tuck in any pastry that's folding over the sides. So it's all tucked in nicely. Finish it off with a good dash of olive oil so the top is nice and golden brown and crispy. And all that I do now is put it into an oven at 180 degrees for 45 minutes, and it turns out perfect. The filling will rise. Give it 10 minutes or so to cool because it is really quite hot. And there you have it. That's my spanakopita. I hope you enjoy it.